Dear students, in this module we will discuss and learn the details about the editing and coding. The major learning objectives of this module are meaning and importance of editing and coding, procedures followed for editing and coding, types and place of editing, qualities of the editor, errors in coding, verification of coded data. Before understanding the editing and coding, first we will discuss a few words about data processing, its meaning and importance. Data processing is the immediate step between the collection of data and analysis of data. This phase will play a vital role in quantitative data analysis. The data, that is both primary or secondary, collected through the tools of data collection, that is interview schedule or questionnaire, is said to be raw data. Such data has to be reduced into manageable and meaningful form for the analysis, keeping the objectives and hypotheses of the research in mind. To this end, editing, coding and verification of data will become as the essential components. So, therefore, first we will see the editing of data, its meaning and importance. As noted earlier, any data collected afresh for research purpose is known as the raw data, and it needs to be transformed into a comprehensible form of data. For this, the first step followed is editing of the data. Though editing of data is not that complex task to the research process, though editing of the data is not that complex task in the research process, it requires an experienced, knowledgeable, talented person to do so. In simple words, editing is a process of examining the collected raw data to delete errors, alternatives, inadequate entries and to correct these when possible. Through editing, one will look and examine the data for incompleteness, inconsistency and errors if any, and will try to remove or rectify the same as far as possible. Thus, editing of data ensures to put together the data as most reliable and consistent. According to Methodological pattern, while editing the data, the editors responsible for examining that the data are as accurate as possible, consistent with other facts secured, uniformly entered, as complete as possible, acceptable for tabulation and arranged to facilitate coding and tabulation. The basic principles or procedures to be followed in editing are checking for the number of schedules or questionnaires, completeness in filling up questions, legibility, and to avoid inconsistencies in answers and to maintain degree of uniformity, and finally to eliminate irrelevant responses. Of these, first one is about checking for the number of schedules and questionnaires. After the collection of data, firstly one should check whether all the questionnaires or schedules are intact as per the number of intended to collect. Generally, in large scale surveys, it is usual practice that the researchers or field investigators will forget some of the filled in questionnaires or schedules by keeping them in different places, and at times some may be misplaced or lost in transit. Therefore, the editors have to follow this step, and if they found that one or more are missed, first one should try to find it out, and if not possible, in rare occasions of course, it is better to accept that it might be lost and the final number may be arrived excluding the one lost. This procedure will end by giving serial numbers to all the questionnaires and schedules. The second basic principle behind coding is completeness of filling up questions. After arranging the questionnaires and schedules in an order, one should look into the same for completeness, that is, whether the answers or responses are filled in for each and every question. It is common practice that some researchers or field investigators in a hurry may not fill up the responses, that is answers, or might not ask the question or questions at all, or at times they might have not understood clearly the answers provided by the respondents. In such cases, the editor should take an appropriate decision depending upon the circumstances, either by himself if the researcher is editor, or after informing the researcher concerned. However, as far as possible, one should not supply the answer. The next principle behind editing is legibility. Sometimes either the researcher or the field investigators, that is in the case of interview schedule, and at times the respondents themselves in the case of questionnaires may not write the answer in legible format. This may be due to hurry to complete the interview or fill up the forms, or poor handwriting, or writing in short form, etc. Some people write very fast, and in this way they write so that comprehension of the text becomes difficult. Making these types of illegible answers into legible is very much essential, because in most cases, that is large scale surveys, the coders or data entry operators will be different from the editors, and thereby they should be clear to understand what exactly the responses are. The next principle behind editing is to avoid inconsistencies in answers. The answers provided by the respondents have to be dependable and reliable with some logical format. Some of the answers may check for the inconsistencies in editing itself to avoid wrong analysis, tabulation, and interpretation. For example, in a survey, if a young boy says that he is 20 years old but completed B.Tech, one should check for the same. Likewise, somebody may tell he is not working but reported to have income, not married but have a child, illiterate but answered as reading newspapers, using IUD but reported as permanent family planning method, etc., which needs to be checked before coding and analysis of data. And the next principle behind editing is to maintain degree of uniformity. This mostly happens in the case of reporting answers to open-ended questions. Respondents may give answers as per their wish to open-ended questions in different ways, which needs to be modified into homogeneously as per the required format to the researcher. See the following example. For a question on caste or occupation, generally information will be collected based on respondents' subcaste or the type of occupation to which they belonged to or engaged in, but later they have to be grouped them into some uniform classification followed depending upon the place of study. Sometimes the respondents may give a response for income per annum instead per month, for type of occupation bank instead of type of occupation in which engaged in the bank, for years of schooling BA instead of 15 years of schooling, etc. The next principle behind editing is to eliminate irrelevant responses. At times, the respondents may give responses that are not that relevant to the topic under consideration. Researchers or field investigators may enter some responses in the schedule so as not hurt the sentiments of the respondents that their views are not taken into consideration, which needs to be eliminated at the stage of editing the data. Now, we will move upon the types or place of editing. The first type of editing is field editing. This type of editing used to be carried out during the course of data collection. In large scale surveys, while the data collection is in progress, generally the supervisor who serves as a editor at that point of time is responsible to scrutinize the schedules mostly on the same day, evening or the next day, for looking into the problems like partially recording the answers to questions or blanks to certain questions, illegible handwriting, translation if any, and at times inconsistencies in some answers. This will be done mostly based on the instructions given by the researcher to the supervisors. Generally, any change in the answers and or alterations are not supposed to be done at this point of time unless the supervisor verifies with the field investigators, and this has to be informed to the researcher concerned immediately, so that uniformity will be maintained by all the investigators or teams engaged in for the study. The other type of editing is central editing. This is also known as in-house editing, which will be done in the central office mostly after data collection or at times during data collection simultaneously. At this point of time, all the procedures of editing given in the earlier section will be carried out by trained editors based on the instructions given to them as well as coders of the data. In addition to these, they should also familiar with the instructions given to the field investigators. As this is final stage of editing, they should be careful or alert in editing. While the editors crossing out the original entry, there should be just one line so as the original is visible to others. Of course, the editors have the right to change answers once they know that the collected response is obviously an error. Generally, entries of the editors should be made in a distinguished color, and that too in a standard form. Editors should initial all answers which they change or supply, and their signature in short format, mostly 2 to 3 alphabets, or distinguished style uniformly to recognize by others, and the date of editing be marked on each completed form. The third type of editing is electronic editing. In the recent past, this type of editing has become somewhat popular, but mostly in the case of printed questionnaires in which respondents will fill up the answers. At times, such questionnaires are sent by electronic mode also. Editing such questionnaires is mostly easy, for which some parameters have to be set in advance, and computer programs have to be developed for the same. In this case, the computer will edit the questionnaire, and the job of the editor becomes easy so as to remove the inconsistencies in the electronic questionnaire. The logical errors can be completely avoided here. Generally, no response answers will be low in electronic questionnaires. Then comes, now we will discuss a few words about the qualities of the editor. The task of editing data is a laborious one, and thereby the data editor should have certain qualities. By and large, the editor should have to be intelligent, objective, and experienced in editing the data. He should know that how important is the handling of data to the researcher. He should try to avoid the slightest changes of bias which which means that he should also be honest with his work. He should keep mind that his data editing will play a major role in the final inferences that the researcher will draw from the data. Besides all these things, he needs abundant patience to go through each and every question of the questionnaires or schedules with utmost care. Now, having discussed briefly about editing, we will focus now on coding of data. What is its meaning and importance? Coding of data generally is to be carried out after the editing of the data. In simple words, coding is the process of classifying responses into meaningful categories. It involves combining or pooling detailed information into a limited number of meaningful categories that enable simple description of the data and allow the statistical analysis. It refers to the process of assigning numerals or other symbols to answers that responses can be put into a limited number of categories or classes. These categories or classes should be appropriate to the research problem under investigation, and each category to be set carefully in order to utilize the available data more fully. Some of the basic principles behind coding are link to theory, exhaustiveness, mutual exclusiveness, and detail. Coming to the link to theory, whatever is the coding pattern followed should take into consideration the theoretical aspects of the topic under study. This is because of the reason that analysis of data, that is after coding, has to approve or disapprove the hypotheses, which are mostly formulated based on the theories concerned on the topic under investigation. For factors in coding process, the ordering of classes, that is mostly in ascending order, is also important so as to fulfill the principle of linking to theory. The second principle of coding is exhaustiveness. While condensing the raw data, one should see that each and every piece of information collected through questionnaires and schedules should be given some numerals or symbols, but without leading any information related to the same characteristic or parameter. Suppose in a household survey, somebody collected information on marital status, may develop a coding pattern of different like single, married, and divorced. Here there is no provision for widowed and separated, and thereby this coding pattern is not exhaustive in nature. The third principle of coding is mutual exclusiveness. In addition to exhaustiveness principle, the pattern of coding should also possess the quality of mutual exclusiveness. This may happen in two types. The first one is overlapping of codes. For example, while developing a coding pattern, one may build up a code for religion like Hindus, Muslims, Sheikhs, Christians, and Catholics, something like that. In this case, Muslims and Sheikhs as well as Christians and Catholics are overlapped once, in which case assigning numbers will become more difficult. The other one is mixing of dimensions. See, for example, in the case of employment, one may decide the codes like blue collar, white collar, government and private employment. The first two ones are one type of measuring the employment, and the second one is another type of measuring employment, but both are in the same coding pattern, which leads to wrong coding. The fourth principle of coding is detail. Coding should be done in detail, that is, each and every piece of information should have a place, that is code, in the code structure of the same characteristics. It is preferable to include too many categories rather than too few. Condensing many categories in a phenomenon can be easily reduced to less number of meaningful categories according to the researcher's convenience by linking to theory. Best examples are current age, occupation, income, etc. But the reverse way is not possible, that is, expanding few categories into many categories. If in the above case information is collected into 2 or 3 categories, that is current age like 0 to 14, 15 to 59 and 60 plus, expanding into 5-year age intervals is not possible. On the whole, the number of categories should be small enough for the purpose of analysis. However, care has to be taken not to retain those categories which have fewer number of cases unless there is a need for the same. Now, we will move upon the types of coding. There are 2 types, one is pre-coding, the other one is post-coding. Pre-coding is mostly done while finalizing the questionnaire or schedule. In this procedure, the researcher in advance will decide the information to be collected, and assigning numbers of numerals, that is codes, will also be done at that point of time. For example, in the case of gender of the respondents, researcher may assign 1 for male, 2 for female are the categories and the codes. In the case of current age of the married woman, 1 may be assigned for 15 to 29, 2 may be assigned for 30 to 39, 3 may be assigned for 40 to 49 and so on. Most of the needed information for the study will be collected based on close-ended questions by getting answers among the 2 or more alternative responses. Of course, at times responses for multiple choice questions as well as making questions also will be collected in pre-coding procedures. But for all these responses, numerals will be assigned, and while collecting the data, the researchers or field investigators will just tick mark or circle the number for which responses provided by the respondents. Though this type of coding saves a lot of time in data collection, for some answers given by the respondents, there will not be any codes, and thereby further coding is necessary after data collection. Another major drawback here is that for some questions, the number of categories or classes may not be known exactly, and sometimes the categories may not be possible to split for further use if needed for some purposes. The second type of coding is post coding. This procedure is followed mostly after data collection. In this case, most of the information will be collected based on the open-ended questions besides close-ended questions for which codes may be or may not be assigned before finalizing the tool for data collection. For this type of coding, the code book, also known as code design or coding frame, is very much essential, which used to be done after scrutinizing the answers for a few questions and asked the respondents through the questionnaires and schedules. Here, the code design describes the locations of variables and lists of code assignments to the attributes composing those variables. It serves 2 essential functions. It is primary guide used in the coding process, and it is a guide for locating variables and interpreting the columns in data file during analysis. In the code book, information will be provided about the following. Number 1, the column number refers to the columns in the code sheet or spreadsheet in which a particular piece of information is to be entered, and in each column information about only one characteristic or variable only will be covered. The second one is question number. This identifies the question number in which the research instrument for the information is being coded. Thirdly, the variable name, which refers to the name of the variable or characteristics. Next one is responses, lists all possible responses for each of the question or variable or characteristics and next one is codes, listing of actual codes that decided to assign to each of the responses of a particular variable or characteristics. Based on this code design, the coders will transcript both the qualitative and quantitative data in numerals into the code sheets or master sheets. The coding process is, after the data collected, the data needs to be arranged or coded so as to make it ready for analysis, either through manually or making use of computers, which will be carried out based on certain procedures. The procedures are edge coding, coding into code sheets or master sheets, direct data entry. Coming to the edge coding, coding in the questionnaire or schedule itself, mostly in the margin of the paper, for which space for coding is to be provided at the time of finalizing the research instrument. In the case of pre-coded instrument, the procedure is not needed. In the case of post coding, the assigned scores will be given to each of the responses for the questions at the edge of the pages of the questionnaires of or schedules, following the instructions of the code book concerned. The second type of coding is coding into code sheets or master sheets. In this procedure, responses for each question will be coded into columns assigned for the same on code sheets or master sheets specially printed or designed for the same. These sheets will be generally printed into 40 rows and 80 columns with cells concerned. Here, each row indicates the information pertaining to one respondent about all those responses or answers provided for the questions of the questionnaire or schedule. On the other hand, each column indicates the responses to a particular piece of information, that is variable or characteristic, provided by all the sample respondents of the study. The next type of coding is direct data entry. This will be done in two ways: punching codes in punch cards, data entry directly to the computerized spreadsheets. In the case of the former one, instead of coding the data into code sheets or master sheets, the codes of the answers to the questions will be entered into punch cards suitably to computers to sort and count. IBM punch cards are popular in this regard, but this procedure has been outdated. Nowadays, almost all the data is entered into computer spreadsheets, that is, looks like code sheets only, with large number of rows and columns and their cells to enter the data with the database programs. Earlier, the popular ones are Lotus 123, DBase, FoxPro, Microsoft Excel, Access, etc. But in the recent past, the SPSS software has become popular, in which the inbuilt database spreadsheet is available. One can enter large number of data into these spreadsheet with less strain, as it is user friendly. This may be done both from pre-coded questionnaires or schedules, as well as entering into code sheets and transcript the same into the spreadsheets. Now, having learned about the coding, we will see the errors in coding. Few errors do occur while coding the data or transcription of the data from questionnaires or schedules to computers. Firstly, if the code design preparation itself, by not following the basic principles of coding as stated earlier, is wrong, means the coding also will be wrong. Secondly, at the time of transcription of data into code sheets or master sheets, errors like overwriting, no clear writing, misinterpretation of codes may likely to occur. In order to rectify those errors, generally coded data will be verified. So, verification of coded data will come into picture. This step is usually followed after coding the data and before planning for analysis. The major objective behind this step is to find out the errors and rectify the same. Generally, two procedures used to be followed for this purpose. One is spot checking, that is generally manually through computer programs. The spot checking case mostly done in manually. In this procedure, the researchers will check the coded data mostly on sample basis, like in the case of large scale data, that is 1 in 10 or 20 etc., examining manually or at times through computers also. Here the assistance of one person will be better, so that one person will read the codes of the questionnaire and schedules, and another person will concentrate on the code sheets or spreadsheets of the computer for checking the codes. Through this procedure, one can find out mainly the transcription errors. In the case of a small sample size, one can check all the coded data on census basis, though the same is through the same procedure. Through the second type of verification of coded data is through computer programs. Verification of coded data can also be carried out through computer programs, mostly in two ways. The first type is valid coding range, which will be done by getting frequencies for each of the variables or characteristics. For example, suppose in a coded data set, the information about religion is given codes as Hindus 1, Muslims 2 and Christians 3. While getting a frequency table for religion variable, all the codes should appear as 1, 2 or 3 only. Any code numbers other than these, like 0 or 5 or 6 etc., are wrong. Likewise, there should not be blank or dot also, which means the concerned code is not entered in the spreadsheet by mistake. The other type of verification of coded data is through logical checks, which is another procedure of verification of coded data, through which one can identify the codes between two or more related variables and characteristics. For example, suppose in a study for one person, education is coded as illiterate, that is 0, but for the same person, information about the newspaper reading coded as yes, that is 1, one should examine which one is correct or not. Likewise, if another person is given a code for occupation as agricultural laborer, that is 1, but his monthly income shown as rupees 30,000 per month, one should check which one is not correct. Of course, the logical checks depend upon the type of data collected and coded. The logical checks can be done through simple commands or programming, mostly readily available in the computer software like SPSS. In sum, in this module, a comprehensive discussion is made to understand the details about editing and coding. Hope with this information, one would be able to understand the importance of editing and coding, and thereby one would be able to one will be able to follow these steps of processing of data while pursuing his or her research endeavors in population studies. Thank you.